And you can think about this in your life. When you start to resent something or someone, it's because what happens is you feel that you've given more than it's given you. So the resentment stems from a lack of reciprocity. Does that make sense? Okay. And so you can understand that if you're pouring your heart and soul into something and it doesn't reciprocate, you will eventually over time become resentful. It's part of the reason why you need partners that challenge your development. You know, if you're just uplifting somebody the whole time and they're not helping you in that capacity or in any way, over time, and this is like a relationship example, you'll build a resentment within the relationship. And that's a miserable feeling. That's a miserable feeling. And what I want to discuss today is how players gain resentment in tennis or athletics, and how to avoid building a resentment in tennis or athletics. You know, I'm sure the temptation to build resentment in us as athletes comes across every career I've ever witnessed. You know, it happens when you're working really, really hard and you don't see the results coming your way. That has happened to every athlete that I've seen have a long career at some point through their career, where they feel like they're putting so much in, but the results aren't coming. And so then they build a resentment, right? And then what happens is they get to this point where they can't even look at the sport. By the end of their careers, they just want so much space from it. It's not a healthy relationship to the sport by the end, because they feel that they put in more than they got out of it. And so, like, again, like, that will happen in the course of your life if you choose to focus on the areas where you're not feeling a reciprocal nature. So again, what you focus at is what you see, going into the gorilla experiment again. And so I want to pose this idea for how to mitigate resentment within our careers. Okay, so I would expect us all to build a resentment towards athletics if you're basically working really, really hard, and that's true in your soul, and you know that, and then you're not getting the results or, you know, the wins that you feel you deserve. And so, like, again, the trouble with that is, like, you don't want to operate your relationship with the sport in a resentful manner, because you'll want distance from it. Okay, so that's not a performance enhancer by any means. Okay, and it's also, forget just performance enhancing. It's not a healthy way to live. It's not a healthy way to live. And so what that means is you have to look very, very hard as to how the sport is reciprocating. You know, maybe the sport isn't reciprocating in terms of wins or losses. And that's what we initially look for. And so, you know, you see a lot of athletes, when they finish the sport, they'll be resentful towards it because, you know, that's what they looked for. They wanted the sport to reciprocate in terms of results. You know, I myself, as I know everybody has, had to face that at some point. And so that makes you look, you have to take a bird's eye view and say, well, okay, maybe I was given something that I'm not even necessarily aware that I was given. So you have to start to look in different places to avoid the resentment. And you can find in almost every situation you encounter across your life, there are opportunities to mitigate your resentment by taking a bird's eye view and looking at where the event or the circumstance reciprocated in ways you may not be currently aware of. So for example, if you pour your heart and soul into your athletic career and it doesn't pay back what you expected to in terms of results, then maybe you should look at where it did pay back. And maybe that might be in resilience, in character, in growth, in relationships. You know, the friends that you've built through the journey. You know, maybe it's reciprocated in powerful ways that you're not focusing on. Remember, what we aim at is what we see. So if we focus on the results, that's all we'll see. And if it didn't reciprocate in that nature, then you'll build resentment. But if you choose to see and focus on the areas where it may have reciprocated, health, relationships, character, then you might actually be able to mitigate your resentment and build a healthy relationship to the experience or the circumstance. And again, obviously I've related this in terms of athletics, but this can easily be related to relationships, to your school, to anything in your life. And a lot of times that's like, okay, there's lessons that are coming out of bad experiences. That might be what it's given to you. Maybe you poured more than it gave back to you on a kind of extrinsic front, but maybe where it reciprocated is in knowledge and wisdom and lessons. And so you have to assume that there is a reciprocal nature through every experience. You have to assume that's there. And if you haven't found it, you haven't looked in a multi-dimensional way yet. Does that make sense? And so that doesn't mean that you need to kind of cling to the event or the experience, but it does mean that you need to basically play a game of hide and seek. I know the reciprocal nature is hiding. It's my job to seek it because I don't want to live with resentment. It doesn't serve you to carry resentment forward in your life. So you have to find ways to ease or disperse of that. Okay, that's a life lesson more than an athletic lesson. There will be times in your life where you notice you're feeling resentment. And it's going to be your job to decide, is this something I want to live with? Or is this something I want to kind of ease the burden of? So that means that you have to look at it in a multidimensional way. Through terrible experiences, provide unbelievable wisdom and lessons. But also from a dopaminergic sense, we know this, that the greater that you struggle, the more you experience joy, okay, and fulfillment. And so you can imagine that to the extent of a bad experience, it's dopaminergically setting you up to experience a fullness of life and a joy within. Okay, so this is something actually quite beneficial for your life to know. If there's ever periods of your life where you feel like you're struggling or you're suffering for that matter, understand that technically speaking, from a dopaminergic standpoint, the greater and the longer that you're struggling and suffering, you can assume that there will be a greater reward or treasure to come out of that. So, right? Because that's the highs and the low of the situation, People who have things come easy to them, the consequence of that is that they don't experience the value of the achievement in its full form. People that had to work really hard to attain things, they feel the value of that achievement in full form. So see, even in your own suffering and struggle, can you find ways to mitigate your resentment by looking at it from a maybe dopaminergic lens? That's one of many ways that you can relieve of that feeling, okay? That you're trying to find love in your life, okay? So you are asking this question, how do I find love? How do I find love, right? So you're asking this question. Well, that's an interesting question. It's like, how do I find the person of my dreams? And Carl Jung would respond to that. The Jungian notion would be, no. You become the person of their dreams. If you want to find love, you have to become love in some ways. You have to become that which the person, your dream person, would be so attracted to. Okay, so if you want to achieve something, you have to become worthy or something that the achievement would be attracted to. Does that make sense? And so we can now twist this into a performance lens. It's like, how do I win a national championship? It's like, become someone worthy of winning a national championship. How do you do that? It's like, well, what does a national championship consist of? What are its characteristics? Right? That's the Jungian notion. It's like, become that which you're trying to achieve. Because here's the problem. It's like, imagine you do find your dream person. Well, who's to say they want to be with you? It's like, yes, you found them, but you're not ready for them to want to be with you. They're a dream person. So that's an ideal in some ways. Have you worked up to the point where they are going to say yes to you? And that's the same with a national championship. It's like, Okay, imagine you know how to win a national championship. So you found how to win it. The question was initially, they went, approaching Carl Jung. It's like, how do I find love? The question could be reframed to be, how do I win a national championship? It's like, become somebody that your dream person would fall in love with. Become somebody that a national championship would organically come to. And we can also tie that to the Viktor Frankl notion we've talked about many times, that success is not to be pursued, it ensues. When you become somebody deserving of success truly and fully, it'll come to you. So whatever you want to achieve in your life, it's not something to chase. You start with self-actualization and development. And Adler was also very big on this idea that everything you want in your life will come to you when you're ready to receive it. So you have to do things to ready yourselves to receive it. Does that make sense? That's why I always give that example of, like, if you want to win a national championship, or if you want to win a national championship, work hard to get everybody else to believe you're going to win a national championship. And that's the best predictor of you being ready to win one. Why? Because when they watch you train, they see someone training like a national champion. They see someone carrying themselves like a national champion. They see someone respecting their coaches and their environment and their resources like a national champion. When you do all the things that a national champion would do, the result of the national championship will find you. You don't need to go looking for it. When you're ready to be that person, when you become that person, it'll find you. So you should always twist the question around. That's what Carl Jung would pose. That it's not how do I find what I'm looking for. It's how do I become the person that what I'm looking for will come find me. Does that make sense, guys? That's a really powerful tool that you could carry for the rest of your life. It's like, don't waste time. Don't waste time trying to pursue something you're not deserving of. What will happen is you may actually have it for a brief period of time, but you'll never be able to sustain it. Does that make sense? It's like you could get the person to fall in love with you, but 10 days later, they're going to realize how insecure you are because you don't feel worthy of it. You could, in tennis words, you could win the big match, but you're not going to be able to win 10 because you're not of that ability yet. If you want to win more matches, raise your ability and level. Don't rely on getting lucky or chasing the win. Once you can make 100 balls in a row, once you can get balls that others can't get, once you can serve X amount of miles per hour with consistency, trust me, the wins will come. And if you truly believe that you can do those things, give it time, it'll find you. Like, I'll use Ryan here, for example, because I really believe, Ryan, you've really improved, and you look like some things are coming your way. Like, I really get the feeling like you're ready. And so now it's kind of like this, like, are you going to lose your mind in the process of waiting for it to find you? I really believe it's going to come and find you. But are you going to lose your mind in the process of it not immediately coming to you? I think you're almost there. I really do think you've built the way you train, the way you build your consistency, your power on your serve, your attitude. Like, these are all signs of somebody who should be achieving great things. And so that's where I start to believe it's going to organically come. And I could say the same to a lot of you. If you look at yourself, if you self-reflect and you say, I do work hard, I am committed, I do have the skill sets, I'm not like severely lacking in any areas. Trust yourself, it'll come. It'll come. Don't force, it'll come. Put your focus on being ready, building that personality and that approach and those skill sets. Any thoughts on that or questions? Does that make sense? Can you raise your hand if you think that that's clear, or do I need to clear that up anymore? Okay. Okay. And so on the other hand, it's like, if you're somebody who isn't putting the effort in, who's getting frustrated too often in practice, who's lacking a discipline, who's lacking a attitude, a commitment, like, even if you're having the results, I believe, unfortunately, it's going to catch up to you. Like, over time, everything equals out and becomes truthful and honest. Like, the truth always comes out. You know, it's like, how you train will eventually catch up to you. I've seen that over and over and over and over again. Not just in my sport, but just generally in the performance world. It's like, even in the business world, it's like, if you do not put the work in, you may win now, but you will probably not win later. So you know, wouldn't you want that to be a little bit more fair like that? It is fair. You know, the people who are having success early, if they don't continue to do the right things, it's a temporary, it's a fleeting success. And just look at all the examples of that. You can look at that even from a character lens. Okay. Okay, couple things I wanted to help you guys with in terms of anxiety relieving biohacks. I think this is some tools that will help you through your tournaments and competitions and just daily life, even practices, when you start to feel nervous or anxious. So there's this very interesting idea. We're going to use this idea of a party. And maybe I've actually given this example before, but so imagine you were going to a party, like, you know, a grade 8 dance or something like that, you know, prom dance or whatever. Okay, you notice everybody that goes there is just so nervous, right? It's like, and they all think everybody's looking at them. It's like, oh, where do I put my arms? You know, are my arms in a funny place? Like, anybody's really watching you, but you think you think everybody's watching you, you know? And so you become really self-conscious. And then you become nervous and anxious, and then you don't feel like the best version of yourself because of your nerves and anxiety, right? And it's all because you put all this focus on yourself, right? So here's a party trick you can try out. If you want to go to a party and feel more comfortable, okay, and less nervous or anxious, try this. Try going around the room and making it your personal job to help everybody else feel more comfortable and at ease. Okay? And watch what happens to you. As you place the thought off of yourself onto others and helping them, you'll relieve your nerves and anxiety, because now you're not self-conscious, conscious of yourself. You're now conscious of others. And so as a result, you relieve your anxiety and nerves. This is true also in verbiage. There's a clear link between the amount of times people say the word I in a sentence, I as in me, and links of misery and depression and anxiety. Like, there's a clear link. It's so interesting. People that use the word I more experience higher rates of misery. Why? Because they're so focused on themselves. It's so interesting, this verbiage idea and the linkage between it. So now, what can we take from this psychological notion and apply to performance? It's like, okay, during the times when I feel nervous and anxious, how can I take the focus off my nerves and anxiety to place it on something outside of myself so that I organically relieve nerves and anxiety? It's like, okay, well, why don't you start with this? It's like 6-all in the third set tiebreaker. Instead of putting my focus and allowing me to think about how nervous and tight and anxious and fatigued I am, why don't I work to try to place my focus on how nervous and fatigued and anxious my opponent is? Why don't I try to look across the court and take a kind of put myself in my opponent's shoes? And then two things will happen. You'll realize how nervous, anxious, and tired your opponent is. And then you'll simultaneously stop thinking about how nervous, anxious, and fatigued you are. That's the party trick. It's like, what do you do at a party? You go around making sure everybody else is having a great time. And then what'll happen is you'll start having a great time. Right? Because you're no longer self-conscious. You're no longer focused on yourself and your problems. In the case of competition, you're focused on your opponent's problems and figuring out how to make them feel worse. And in the case of a party, you're focused on your friends' problems and thinking how to make them feel better. Right? And I think you guys have probably heard this, right? Technically speaking, from a dopaminergic lens, we experience more gratification when we give than we get. So interesting. Higher levels of happiness when we give than we get. That's actually fitting in regards to Maslow's hierarchy of needs at the pinnacle, to contribute to something greater than oneself. You don't realize or achieve the maximum levels of satisfaction, contentment, and fulfillment by dedicating your life to yourself. Maslow's needs insist that that's only achieved at the pinnacle through a contribution to something greater than yourself. So you see how these all tie together? Okay. Any thoughts on that really quick? And you can even try that in tough physical moments. During the tough physical moments of our practice, try helping your teammates and watch how much easier the plank will feel for you. Just try it. Give it a try this week, guys. Okay, here, if you notice when you look forward from the sides, you have peripheral vision. Okay, and so what is peripheral vision for? Like, what's its fundamental use? What it's for is detecting negative threats. Okay, or detecting threats for that matter. So, because you can imagine, like, if I'm talking to Phoebe, okay, and I'm looking at her, and then like a tennis ball is coming from the side of me and it's just about to hit me in the head, like my peripheral vision will detect it because it's there to detect threats. Okay, and then all of a sudden I can like sometimes dodge it. Like, isn't it amazing that I can be looking at Phoebe and then I can still manage to dodge a ball that's like coming fast at my head? It's like, why? Well, my peripheral vision is there to detect it. Peripheral vision is detecting and keeping me alert and wired for negative threats. Okay? So is that clear? Okay, and so what does that mean? It's like, well, while your peripheral vision is doing its job, acting as the security guard of your vision, or the security guards of your vision, it means that there's still potential threats out there. And so like you can link that to nerves and anxiety in some ways. So I don't know if you've ever noticed sometimes before matches, athletes or performers, I've even seen Djokovic do this, right? They'll sit on the changeover before the match and they'll shift their eyes side to side, side to side. Well, what is that doing? It's like, it's basically relieving the security guards of your vision from its duties. It's saying, no, I've already checked there, I've checked there, I've checked there. And so it's a biohack to relieve nerves and anxiety. It's so interesting. Double inhale sigh. It's something that we kind of mimic when we yawn. Okay, and so like what we're doing is we're basically going into more of a relaxation mode. So when we're very nervous or anxious or uptight in a way that's like basically deterring our performance, we're not in the most relaxed state. We're not in an optimal state of relaxation. Obviously, there's too much, but there's too little. We're not in an optimized state of relaxation. You breathe in once. So if you notice, I'm doing a double inhale sigh. Now, like a lot of you guys are taught to do like deep breaths, like, and that's great. But I would pose the idea that there's maybe even a more effective physiological response in order to, action in order to kind of ease nerves and anxiety, and that's the double inhale sigh. The medical director at Stanford talks often about this, actually, in terms of tips for relieving stress. So you can all try it. It's like breathe through your nose. Do you see what I'm doing there? So I'm doing my first deep breath, and then I'm pushing my inhale one more farther, so I have two, and then I relieve. And you do that throughout the day, and you do that while you're stressed, you'll see it has a positive physiological response, right? So hopefully that's so hopefully that's interesting for you guys. Any thoughts about that, guys? That's kind of those are the 3 biohacks that I thought I'd share with you today in regards to relieving nerves and anxiety and it's so useful because we all feel it through tournaments and matches, no? Even when you walk through like the hallway of the tournament, it's like you can feel the nerves and anxiety building up. It's like that would be a useful time to do the double inhale sigh, or when you're sitting on the changeover to do the shifting eyes, or when you're in a third set tiebreaker deciding the match to practice the idea of placing thought off yourself and onto others. Okay, raise your hand if we're clear. We're going to talk about honeybees. Now, you've heard me talk about other animals and creatures before, and today's going to be about honeybees. Okay, so one of the ways that honeybees signal that they found, for example, a flower that they believe is worth the rest of its tribe journeying out to or pursuing, is they'll go back to the other honeybees and they'll do this sort of dance. Okay, it's like this wiggle. And the faster and the more enthusiastically that they dance, the more it signals to the fellow honeybees that the flower that they found is worth pursuing. It's very interesting, right? It's like, that's how they signal how much they believe that the flower is worth pursuing. To the extent that of the speed of the dance. Does that make sense? So it's like, if they go back to their honeybees and their fellow honeybees and they don't dance fast or passionately, then they're not going to convince their fellow honeybees that they're not going to be able to convince them to go and journey out with themselves out to the flower. It's not a valuable resource. It's like they're signaling that they're trying to convince their fellow honeybees to come with it, but they're unfortunately through the passion of the dance, they're not going to be effective in convincing their fellow honeybees to come and journey out with them. Does that make sense? And so that's interesting, right? It's like, well, so that's how they signal through passion in some ways. And we also can learn a lot about ourselves from this experience, from this literature and research on honeybees, because the way you can think about ourselves doing that is how passionately we speak. We do this too, but we do it in our levels of speech, right? So technically speaking, the more passionate you are when you speak about a topic, the more you're going to have an effective form for convincing and influencing the person who you're speaking to that what you're speaking on or talking about is something that they should believe in. Does that make sense? Like, that's technically how we signal, whether we're aware of it or not, to the extent of the levels of the passion we speak with in regarding topics, is the likelihood of influencing and the effectiveness of influencing or persuading others to believe in ourselves regarding that topic, right? So, and even in competence levels, I won't speak as confidently about volcanoes because I'm not a volcano expert as I would about, let's say, performance. I just instinctively, I speak much less confidently or passionately or enthusiastically regarding volcanoes than I do about a topic I know, right? Just organically, like unconsciously. That's wired within us, right? So, like, this is why it's really important that you learn to inject enthusiasm and passion into things that you're trying to do, into the things that you're trying to receive opportunities with. So imagine you're interviewing for a job or a position on a team, or you're in the recruiting process. It's like, to the extent of the passion that you have within that kind of interview or recruiting journey is the extent that you would be able to influence or persuade the people that you want to buy into you, for that matter. Does that make sense? And so, like, you can also understand that in how you train. It's very hard for me personally, as overviewing our players, to believe in the players that don't train with passion and don't speak with passion. You know, I don't think somebody's in love with their craft if they don't speak passionately about it. And when I think about my own life, like the greatest players I had ever come across, top 100 players, they were so much more passionate and speaking about their development than players lower than them in the rankings, right? So it's like, it's not just a tool, it's also a truth. It's like you can tell a lot about a player through how passionate they are and speak. You can tell a lot about them. Just like honeybees can tell a lot about other honeybees through how passionate they operate. And so you should then go and evaluate your own life. Like, am I passionate enough that I would be able to convince others to help me? Because like to reach the top, you're going to need a lot of help. That's for sure. Like, I don't care who you are. I don't know anybody who hasn't needed a lot of help from people. And in order to get help from people, they needed buy-in. And so how do you create buy-in? Through your levels of passion and enthusiasm. So, okay, so the question is like, look at yourself. How do I speak? How do I act? Do I signal my belief in myself through my actions in regards to that nature? That'll determine the resources I'll be able to likely be provided over the course of my career. You know, if a player comes up to me and he says, or she says, like, I'll do anything it takes to be the best here. It's way different than if a player comes up to me and says, yeah, I want to be good, you know? Yeah, I want to get better today. Like, look at the difference. And I would naturally assume that the first player is going to be somebody worth investing more into than the second. Does that